Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy and also a bit proud of being here today to show you everything that we have done in the last 4 years. So I would like to welcome on the stage with me Fanny, Joao, and Massimo. As you probably know, Roadmap is a Edge 2020 funded European project that started 4 years ago now, and we are an interdisciplinary and multi-actor project. These two aspects matter to us quite a bit, and you will see how in the coming minutes. We are 17 partners, 10 countries were involved in research activities, including 2 low and middle income countries, and the whole project has been coordinated by my institution in RAI. So just a quick introduction so that everyone has in mind what Roadmap was about, although I'm pretty sure that you already know that, but our main objective was to foster transitions toward prudent antimicrobial use, and the project was broken down into 3 main areas. The first one, which we call the pillar 1, was dedicated to socioeconomic analysis, where basically we wanted to understand the drivers of AMU. AMU stands for antimicrobial use in a variety of contexts, and studying the behavior of the stakeholders, but as well the knowledge, practices, and motivation of animal health professionals. And once we did that, we moved to our second pillar, which was much more dedicated to participatory approaches, where we developed our living labs. You probably have heard about that, and this will be described and discussed in much more details in our second presentation. So basically the objective was to co-develop with the stakeholders, with the animal health professionals, strategies to encourage prudent antimicrobial use. And our third and fourth pillar were more dedicated to assessment and engagement of the different various strategies, but also, of course, all the actors we've been working with. Another important thing in the way the project was conceived, it's that it was more or less kind of a case study organization of the project. We, as I said, 10 countries were involved in the research and development activities. So we studied 4 main sectors: the pig sector, poultry sector, the dairy sector, and the beef sector, and different types of production systems. So intensive livestock production system, organic or label production system, and more marginal types of production system as well, because this is one thing that is important to us. If I highlight very quickly our key messages that, of course, you will see all along the presentation, and also especially in the conclusion where we will share our general recommendations. But 3 key messages here I would like really to stress out. First of all, individual or behavioral change is of course important, but we do believe that lock-ins and opportunities come rather from the systemic drivers. And this is why basically Roadmap has let an important place to social sciences and economics, basically, who've been able to really focus on those systemic drivers. Second key message, technical innovation of course matters, but transitions toward prudent antimicrobial use are what we call multi-level, so they are also related to social, economic, and political innovation. And last but not least, we do strongly believe that there is no one-size-fits-all, as we call it, solution, that each production system, each country have their strengths and weaknesses, and various contexts have to learn from each other. And this is really what we have tried to do and to achieve within the project. So all of our activities, the value chain analysis, the living labs, the cost effectiveness evaluation, and also the ex-ante impact assessment that you will hear about in the second presentation, have studied and confirmed basically those perspectives. So in this first presentation in the morning, we have decided basically to focus rather on the first part of the first pillar basically of the project, so everything that comes from our socio-economic analysis, and that basically try to answer that big question: how could we improve the system so that it supports change? And you will see that in the second presentation we will much more focus on everything that has been achieved through our participatory approaches, especially the living labs and the impact assessment. So quick overview of how this presentation will go, and we will share the floor with my colleagues here, Fanny Baudouin from Ilvo, Joao from University of Liverpool, and Massimo from Unibo. So we will start basically trying to show you how we do apprehend the antimicrobial decision system, and then basically focusing on two important basically area that we've studied. So first of all, how could we implement a framework for action, basically articulating public regulation and market-led initiatives, and then moving on how could we change, or at least first understand and then change practices, especially those of farmers and veterinarians. And in the end, we move back to our general recommendations for large and long-lasting transitions. So I will straight away leave the floor to Fanny.
Thanks, Nicolas. Yes, so in this part of the project, we wanted to better understand the antimicrobial decision system. So more concretely, we wanted to understand how end users, being farmers and veterinarians, make their decisions regarding antimicrobial use by considering the context in which they are. So we don't study them as such, but more how they interact with their own context. And this is a bit specific for systems thinking, because with this approach, you try to understand how different parts of an entity or a system are influencing one another. You don't focus on one part, you rather consider the whole and the interactions between the different parts. Maybe I can give you a more concrete example, the one of a football game, where you have a team of players that work together to win the game. And you can wonder, do they have everything they need to actually do what they're supposed to do, win the game? And you would actually study that by trying to first see, okay, who's involved in this? You would have different types of people. You would have the players, the supporters, the referee, etc. They all have a role. They all interact with one another. They are connected. You might also wonder, like, okay, do you need some things for this to happen, like infrastructure? In this case, you would need a field, you would need goals, you would need places for people to stand. You need certain infrastructures that must be there for them to do what they're supposed to do. You can also consider the rules, like the game doesn't happen like that. You have rules for the game to happen, but you also have things that are called soft rules that people consider to be normal to do or not normal to do, but there's no law or whatsoever to prohibit it. Then you could also look at, are the people well connected, and do they have capabilities? And that's actually what we looked at in our livestock production sectors. We try to see who is involved in this, what's the role of the different actors, how are they interconnected, what are the regulations, how do these regulations have an impact on what people are doing, are there also production standards that are affecting what people are doing or deciding, norms, habits, do they have infrastructure that they need and that they have or not, etc. And then we came up with these stakeholder maps. So we drew all of these interactions, we analyzed all of them, and we looked at how everything was interconnected and how this had an influence on the decisions that people made regarding antimicrobial use. Now, this is an example for the Flemish pig case study. Here is another one for the Danish pig case study, where you can actually really see the diversity of actors. And in the first one, you could also really see how they were interconnected. Now, once we had analyzed all these structures, we wondered whether, given the context, given the organization of things in the supply chain, was it easy for actors to move from a situation where you could use antimicrobials a bit in a more uncontrolled way, so to say, to a situation where you had to really have a very prudent use? Are they able to make this transition easily or not? And by doing this exercise for actually 15 different sectors in 9 countries, we identified 93 lock-ins or barriers to actually implement a more prudent antimicrobial use. And we also categorized them. And what is interesting is that most of them are actually located in the category market formation and destabilization. And this relates to the fact whether people are actually able to upscale and outscale new innovations. So if you invent a new business model, can you actually really implement it? And whether or not people are able to abandon practices that are now considered to be harmful. And so most of the barriers were actually located in this category where people don't have a lot of opportunities to do so. Another one is the directionality. Here we have 15% of the barriers. And that relates to the fact, do the different actors in the system perceive the problem to be a problem, and also it to be an urgent problem? Are there other problems that are considered at this moment more important, like, for example, climate change or nitrogen emissions? Or also, do all the stakeholders agree on the solutions that we should implement? And there as well, you could see that there were big discrepancies. And then finally also knowledge dissemination. There we also found 15% of barriers, so we can also still do something about that. Then what we also did is that we noticed that some of these barriers were coming back in different sectors. And so we studied them to see, can we also identify patterns? And we identified 12 characteristics of the livestock sectors that have an influence on antimicrobial use. And the first one is the strength of the veterinary public health services. So in cases where this was very strong, these cases appeared to be more at advantage to reduce their antimicrobial use because they had monitoring systems in place, organizations that would control whether people would follow regulations, implementation of guidelines, etc. The second one was the prevalence of holistic veterinary medicine. In some case studies, it was already the norm for veterinarians to actually consider themselves as production advisors and health advisors. And they were not only focusing on animal health, but also on the environment around and on production parameters. And where this was more prevalent, there were better chances actually, or more chances or opportunities to reduce AMU. Third one is the sector size. Smaller sectors had fewer opportunities, public and sector funding actually to develop know-how and knowledge. In sectors that were heavily fragmented, so where different actors are owning different parts of the supply chain, we noticed that all these parts of the supply chain had different economic realities and therefore also different economic interests. And it was sometimes hard to align everyone to implement change, also because the different parts depend on one another. So one part can just not change something. You need often the whole chain to kind of follow the movement. Vertical integration is kind of linked to that, collaboration between actors as well. In sectors where there was good integration or a good collaboration, things were more easy to reduce antimicrobial use. And the economic situation, fluctuations in this were seen to make things more difficult. For example, the situation is very bad. People don't have a lot of capacity to invest, but also are not very willing to do so because they don't know what the future will hold. In situations where it's very good, the focus is more on production rather than other aspects like preventive medicine. So in fluctuating situations, people focus on other things. The production standards as well and consumer demands as well. So for one example is white veal meat. In order to produce that, you need to have iron levels that are quite low in animals, and although it's regulated and animals tend to be healthy, they are less robust than others. So this is a consumer demand that drives AMU. Influential stakeholders, when they're very good and influential stakeholders that foster good practices, people feel more empowered to do so and follow the move. Then in sectors with a low sense of urgency and a low sense of legitimacy, I think this is kind of self-explanatory, people had less opportunities to reduce AMU. And then finally, some cases, the habits of people or the easiness to do some things had been complicated. So the status quo would have been destabilized. And in these cases, there were more opportunities to move towards other approaches than using antimicrobials. So yes, this analysis actually helps us to identify critical points for action and also levers and opportunities for change. Some of these have been addressed actually in a participatory approach, and that will be explained in the next session. Now I'll give back the word to my other colleagues because they dug more in specific issues, being more public regulation and market initiatives, how these can drive change, and how practices have been changed. So Nicolas, back to you.
Yes, here we present a part of the study we did about the policies on for more prudent use of antibiotics in farming and AMR contrast. So what we present here is an analysis that starts from a global survey made by the TRACS, that is the global database for antimicrobial resistance, and this is a country self-assessment that each year all countries that are member of the WHO are asked to perform, and a part of them actually perform. So, all the European countries participate in this survey. And so this is a self-assessment of the policies put in place and the different measures put in place to reduce antimicrobial use in farming. And the measures are classified into four main categories, which are awareness, that is all what concerns information, training for stakeholders, and general information for public. Evidence relate to the monitoring of the use and its measurement at the country level, but also at the farm level. Practices are what is concretely done by farmers and veterinarians to reduce humus, so to use best practices in terms of biosecurity, animal health, or alternative to the use of antimicrobials. And lastly, governance, that is related to the coordination of the different measures that are needed, but also to research and higher education. So, and we associated the self-evaluations, so the answers that the countries provided to in this survey to some scorings, and so we did this qualitative analysis of based on the scoring obtained by the different countries. And the European member states can be classified in 4 groups of countries according to the level of implementation of their national action plan related to the standards globally set by the quadripartite, so the WHO and the other international organizations that are involved in this. And so the main results are that in terms of weakness, the best performing countries, so the countries of the first group, identify the main weakness in the awareness policy area. So to increase, also the main performing countries, the most performing countries, feel the need to improve to awareness of stakeholders with respect to the issue. And also, the government policy area is also identified as they find weakness in the full involvement of all the relevant sectors in the implementation of the national plans, especially with defined monitoring and evaluation processes in place. For the other countries, also the awareness is again a policy area that most countries find weak, but also in this case also the level of implementation of best practices in farms and in animal health practices. One main thing is also that most of countries do not use the available data on antimicrobial use, so the monitoring system, to modulate the national policies. So we found there are weaknesses on this point to how to use the information we have of the actual use of antibiotics to apply, to modulate, to take decisions about the measures to be undertaken. And if we compare the situation of the EU member states to the global context, we can say that the European countries are quite well with respect to the rest of the world, especially thanks, I think this is thanks to the European policies that have been the 2 European strategies that have put in place starting from 2011, and one of the main strengths is the monitoring system, so the capacity of the EU countries to monitoring this phenomenon, the use of antibiotic in farming, and the implementation of that will be in the future with respect to this system of monitoring. And we also identify the structural policy variables that show impacts on IMO. We analyze the level of use of antibiotics and the presence of different measures. And what we found that the countries that have an historical trend of huge use of antibiotics in farming have the most difficult problem for decrease the use. And another aspect is another variable that is highly correlated is the proportion of pig production in total animal production. And on the other side, on the side of the positive effects of policy, we found that it was also a result of the previous analysis that we have seen, that multi-sectoral One Health approaches are more effective for reducing the use of antibiotics with accurate information, the monitoring systems, and professional training for operators. Thank you.
Thank you, Massimo. Another point here on how to basically implement framework for action is that, of course, public regulation matters, but we have also observed a lot of market-led initiatives that were used and that were also kind of effective to support change toward prudent AMU. Here, I would like just to give a quick example from a work that has been done in France on the pig sector. And you could see on this infographic how within just a few years, basically, this sector has slightly developed a solid offer of antimicrobial-free products. And you can see here all basically the retailing industry or the producers organization that have step-by-step developed such kind of basically type of product. A couple of points here is that, and that of course relates as well to other similar initiatives in other countries or sectors, but most of these initiatives have been initiated by downstream industry, especially the retailing industry, but also followed at some point by the producers' organization. And it was interesting and important because through this market-led initiative, we also observed the development of monitoring tools and economic incentives that have pushed toward better practices. And it was also interesting to see the role of not only the farmers here, to how they have been involved in those initiatives, but how other animal health professionals, in particular the vets and animal health technicians, were basically engaged in such initiatives through recruitment, audit, control, and support, basically, of the farmers. However, like as well for public regulations, this kind of measures have also some kind of weaknesses that should be addressed in the future. We have noticed a lack of harmonization of the indicators and the specification of such products, sometimes a confused communication toward the consumers, and also some kind of a limited demand as well of the consumer, because certainly as well the communication was confused, which led to this overall question: should low or prudent antimicrobial use be the standard or the premium quality? And there is some kind of confusion here that has been explained by many of the actors we interviewed there. So if you have questions, of course, we can come back on that. I'm moving to the general recommendation of this part on policy and market-led initiatives. First of all, as I was saying in the introduction, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Strategies must be combined and tailored to the production system and the social and economic context in which they operate. We need to strengthen governance through accurate monitoring and surveillance system, participatory local involvement, and integration between local and national action. And monitoring should precisely identify the hotspot sectors, farmers, and regions needing intervention to improve cost-effectiveness of intervention, as Massimo stressed out. Economic incentives as well, we believe they should be targeted to farmers who can struggle the most to change, so that we can avoid setting up a two-pace dynamic where only certain types of farms and production systems would manage to move towards prudent antimicrobial use. We believe it's a big challenge here to be aware of. Of course, improving awareness and, as I was stressing out, the need for harmonization, shared tools, and articulation of different styles of tools, including mandatory measures, such Massimo has described, and voluntary initiatives as well. I'm switching to the second part here, and mostly the work that has been done in our second work package and the 5.1 as well, focusing now more on practices of animal health professionals, and namely farmers and veterinarians. Quickly, what we've done in general here, and especially on the involvement of veterinarians in this trend towards prudent AMU, we have basically observed a series of 4 structural trends, structural dynamics that are currently supporting the development of preventive approaches to animal health, and that need further probably support. So first of all, diversification of veterinary knowledge and services. Basically, vets need now, and they're on the way basically to offer larger services to their clients that help them basically to move toward those prudent AMU, which comes actually with a form of renewal of the working relationships between vets and other livestock professionals. First of all, the farmers, but also technicians, and veterinarians slightly become more like supervisor or managers of animal health, while they manage to delegate more tasks to other professionals. And this trend comes as well with forms of protocolization of animal health management, which have, of course, their strengths, but also sometimes some kind of weaknesses, because it could be some burden in terms of admin tasks and so on. But these kind of tools and forms of protocolization help basically the veterinarians to renew their working relationships with their colleagues and to diversify basically their knowledge and services. And all of that would and can only work if there is emergence of new business models for veterinary practices. I will highlight that in the recommendation of this part. Another thing that has been done here is also to understand the variety of veterinary practices as well as farming practices, as I will say in a minute. But here it is important, of course we have general recommendation, but as I said earlier, everything must be tailored to specific context. And veterinarians are not all the same necessarily, and they have different ways of caring for animals. And we performed this quantitative survey in all the European countries that were involved in the roadmap project, and we really observed that there is a important heterogeneity of the veterinary profession, and it is essential to adapt our tools and our communication to the various profiles of veterinarians. So we have a first cluster here with veterinarians who are probably supporting AMU reduction the more timidly. We have also public health-oriented vets who are really convinced about AMU reduction and who are really supporting change and helping farmers to do so. And we also have a cluster, a group of concerned vets, but also kind of wary vets who consider that they have done already a lot, which is true, to reduce antimicrobial use, and that are a bit more difficult to convince to do even more now. So we strongly believe that we need really to be aware of this variety of practices in the way we would like to address and try to engage with the veterinary profession. And similar things could be said about farmers. Here I'm relying on the work that has been done by Liane Sutherland and her colleagues from the Hutton Institute, but they have observed that there are different ways of being a good farmer, basically. So what is it to be a good farmer? Of course, they all want to take good care of their livestock, which means treating the livestock the animals when they're sick, maintaining healthy living conditions in which to thrive. But the qualitative study that we've done have really shown that the perception of what other farmers do strongly influence antimicrobial use in each farm. And there are different profiles of good farmers. So basically, there are some countries like Sweden where there is an important social cost to using antimicrobials, where in the end farmers would see AMU as a failure. But there are other countries like France, for example, where there is a social cost sometimes to not using antimicrobials, and farmers see antimicrobial use as necessary, at least in certain conditions. And while a third bunch of countries, such as Vietnam here, where we have important awareness that is emerging and developing, but a lack of incentives, basically, to support change for those farmers. So what is important here is really to have in mind that we can't address, talking about vets or talking about farmers, all these actors in the same way, because they perceive what is a good practice, what is a good way to care for their animals differently. And it's important to use tools such as benchmarking, participatory initiatives to help them seeing and compare to other farmers and motivate change. So a quick general recommendation for changing practices before I let the floor to my colleague on my right, regarding vets. And all of that is detailed in much more with much more details in the policy brief that you can take on the corridor. But antimicrobial prescription can be reduced by better communication on the benefits of prevention, implementing animal health visits in every country, and encouraging veterinarians to take responsibility for developing collaborative farm health plans, encouraging the monetization of veterinarians' work and responsibility on the implementation and follow-up of care protocols, and also strengthen preventive approaches in the career development of veterinarians. Regarding farmers, it is important to provide grants to improve facilities, working with the supply chain, bundling antimicrobial use messaging with broader education around hygiene and disease prevention, and targeting training to the staff farm who administer antimicrobials rather than the primary farmer who might be not that much aware of what's going on in terms of practices in its facilities. So I will leave the floor now to Joao for a focus on cost-effectiveness analysis of alternatives to antimicrobials.
Thank you, Nicolas. So following from what Nicolas was saying and all the rest of my colleagues, and considering that there's a lot of heterogeneity with regards to the motivations of farmers who are businessmen managing the herds of the animals, they are faced with some questions when thinking about or planning changes to their farming practices and how these might affect the business performance, animal health, and in the end, the performance and livelihoods of their families and the people that they employ. So what this change could mean in terms of, in monetary terms, so what are the added costs and benefits to this change? This type of information actually is scarce, and the data to support this analysis is also scarce, and this might hamper the willingness or ability of the farmers to change their production practices. So filling it in this knowledge gap would empower the farmers to take action. I will provide you a brief summary of a work we did, which is a structured scoping literature revision on the effect of the alternatives to antimicrobials or interventions to reduce its use in animal food producing species. And you can see that there's a lot of heterogeneity in the interventions that were identified across the 232 papers that contributed to the scoping literature revision. And so some general conclusions of this work: some options seem to be more promising than others, so there seems to be interventions or alternatives to antimicrobials that are effective under field conditions, which could help then farmers to reduce the antimicrobial usage. And this was particularly the case for bioactive proteins and peptides, and also for feed and water management. So the effect was classified qualitatively according to it being bidirectional, so you don't actually know which direction it might take in the end when it's implemented. It could be negative, equivalent, or positive. And so for these two categories of interventions, you can see that they are consistently either equivalent, which is okay for the farmer, or positive. So it would be even better off by implementing or adopting this type of changes. And again, there was heterogeneity in the effect. And this heterogeneity is between and within species. So this is dependent on farm-specific factors that need to be taken into consideration when thinking about implementing these changes, and this probably calls for advisory, animal health advisory at the farm level. Another work that was done made use of a large data set on a French poultry integrator that allowed the group to look at the effect of use of antimicrobial in the profit of the farms. And you can see that there's generally, and regardless of the indicator and level of analysis, be it the flock or the farm, that the profit increases with antimicrobial usage to a certain level, but then it drops, which could indicate that these farms are either struggling with animal health with the higher or more increased use of antimicrobials. But again, so there is an association with increased antimicrobial usage and reduced profit, be it at a flock level or at the farm level. And this was also the case for vaccine use. So the more vaccines that are implemented to manage the health of the animals, there is an increased profit, and it increased significantly by 7.03% to 22.41% when compared to the farmers that didn't use vaccinations, and this was for farmers that use 2 or 3 vaccines respectively. So some take-home messages. We need to acknowledge that farmers are business managers in some way, and that they assess the risk of a change based on the knowledge on the probability and the consequences or magnitude of the consequences of these changes. So to provide them information about the cost effectiveness of alternatives to using antimicrobials is important to help them make their own decisions in managing this perception of risk of the change. There is no silver bullet or one-size-fits-all solution, as we have all seen, based on what Nicolas and the other colleagues have mentioned. But there is light in the end of the tunnel. So there is research being conducted, and we are having nice results from these studies indicating that there are alternatives that can replace antimicrobials in an effective way, cost-effective way. So in the end, we all need more research that will focus on the unknowns in order to help guide farmers, the value chain businesses, and governments into tackling the antimicrobial abuse and resistance problem. And this is it. Thank you.
Yes, and so this is then the last part of the presentation, the take-home messages for long and long-lasting transitions. So first, in order to have systemic improvements to drive behavioral change, we actually recommend to strengthen veterinary public health systems where necessary, and especially to develop adequate and performant monitoring systems. Next, we also advise to further develop and enable the prevalence of holistic veterinary medicine, as highlighted by Nicolas, so that vets actually become animal health and production advisors rather than problem solvers. And then finally, we also noticed that voluntary approaches are often implemented to drive change, but we noticed that in cases where AMU was more reduced, there were also other mechanisms that had been used, mainly legislative ones. So this also seems to be the way to go, to use voluntary approaches, but also complement them with legislative ones. Then regarding social and economic innovation to support technical change, we recommend to improve the collaboration and coordination between different actors and between different segments of the food supply chain. Then sometimes it might also be interesting to make certain practices less attractive than to make others more attractive. For example, if it's more difficult to do something, you might automatically start doing something else. And that might be more effective than to make something else more attractive to you. I hope this is somewhat clear. And then finally also to better communicate on the fact that the implementation of preventive approaches does not necessarily result in increased costs, which Joao just highlighted. And then the last part, the tailored solutions to take everyone on the journey towards prudent AMU. We recommend to create also funding opportunities for smaller sectors to develop know-how. And then finally, to context specifically rephrase the problem of AMU. Because now it's phrased as a public health issue, which it is. But we could rephrase this to something that's also more appealing to farmers, being also the fact that if we don't have antimicrobials, it will be harder to produce animals. And it's also very important to safeguard their effectiveness, just to be able to produce animals. That's it, I think. So I think.
Thank you very much to you all and to the audience. We have some time for questions, so feel free to raise your hands. I don't know if we have a mic in the room. It's here, because we might hear, but people online would be probably better for people online. Thank you, Noradi.
a quick question about how you motivate your farmers with pricing. So particularly for the French system, where you have an antimicrobial zero policy for some of your pork products, do you happen to know how much more the farmers are paid per kilogram of pork,
Well,
roughly?
so you're referring to what I said regarding the antimicrobial-free products. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the producer organizations. They don't have all the same bill of specifications or contracts. I don't know if I wouldn't say a mistake. I don't know if in the room you have an answer to, yeah. I think Anne is here, so she might know more precisely than I do the prices that they can get.
Yes, it really depends because it's private initiative, the dynamics. So it's around 2 or 4 centimes of euros, but it's not only for antibiotic-free practices, because in the private initiative, antibiotic-free dynamics are mixed with other demands, claims, OGM-free, or the origin of feed, sorry. Yes, so it's very difficult to answer, but there is a bonus, an economic incentive, yes.
Thank you, Anne.
No more questions?
Don't be shy.
Yeah.
I just felt the need to break the silence. Sorry. Now, just on the last note that you said, Fanny, we need. I think it was you who said something about the other reasons for vets and farmers to reduce antimicrobial use, to see the AMR as a problem for them, because we were surprised that the Swedish vets and farmers, they are so worried about public health and they see this as the issue, and they don't really feel that it's a problem for them. Because they don't see AMR as a sort of looming problem for them, where they really should see it like that.
Yes, so it's double. First, they don't see it as a problem for their own health, while they are actually the ones who are more at risk because they are in close contact with animals.
Well, actually, they did. They saw it for their own health and their own children, but they didn't see it for their animals.
In most case studies, they didn't. That was very interesting. It was a result from Leanne's deliverable that they did not see it as a problem for their own health.
Swedish farmers, the Swedish farmers,
Sweden, yes.
And they didn't. I mean, because we talk about that, but they don't perceive that. They worry about their children, but they don't worry about their animals.
Yeah, so that's one part. And then indeed also for their own production, they don't really see the risks on the long term for their own production. So yeah, it's also because the problem has really been framed towards public health so far. Yeah.
We have also received a question online. I'm going to read it, and then we can respond. So, authorities and farmers ask a lot of the veterinarians, what are the drivers for change for veterinarians? What are their needs? I think that's you, right, Nicolas?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the problem of antimicrobial resistance, we could see it as well as an opportunity for the veterinary profession in the way that it helped them to change a lot of things in the way they are positioning themselves with regard to their professional relationship with farmers, in the type of tools that they are using, and so on. So I really do believe that what we've called here the development of preventive or holistic approaches to animal health is a long-lasting trend within the veterinary profession, which didn't really start 10 years ago when we started to implement new policies to manage AMR and AMU. But the veterinary profession has been really able, I guess, to embrace basically this decisive issue in the last 10 years, to help them moving towards that. And their need here is really of course, there are issues that have been explained here, such as strengthening the veterinary network on the field and so on, but also really moving towards these preventive approaches, those tools, the new services that veterinarians can offer to their clients, the importance as well to have animal health visits implemented in every country and so on. So I do believe that the needs of veterinarians are here, and of course that is related to those structural dynamics we've been mentioning, that vets needs to change as well the business model of veterinary medicine market or animal health market to be able basically to accompany the change toward prudent AMU. But I do believe it's larger than that, and AMR, AMU, of course, this is a topic we've been working on in the last 4 years, but if we really look at the whole animal health sector as such, I think the change is much bigger than that, and vets are able, I think, to conceive that and to work in a way that drives larger changes that are, of course, very important to lower the use of antimicrobials, but not only that.
Jan Vaarten, FEI. To speak about veterinarians, I think it's of course important for veterinarians to be aware and to fulfill the new role that you described as more the advisor than the problem solver. But there are many things that interact. For example, also something like the new EU veterinary medicines regulation, where there are more recognition of the veterinarian as a key player in prescribing antimicrobials. Also that kind of things that strengthen the position of the veterinarian on the farm. The animal health visit, etc. All these things work together, and that allows the veterinarian to play the role we expect the veterinarian to play, and he should play.
Absolutely.
Okay. I understand that there is a high diversity inside the country between farmers, vets, but is it possible after this project to make a comparison between countries and to try to understand which country has been most successful and why?
Well, this is not. I mean, comparison between the countries is not really something that we have done. I mean, in some cases, I mean, Massimo perhaps can on the policy governmental aspect that has been done. But as you know, we have used also our qualitative studies to understand the variety of practices, and so that of course we have a larger toolkit basically to address the issue, to communicate, to try to engage with the actors, because we do believe that perhaps one of the issue back 10 years ago or something like that was to have like a framework for action that was not taking care or taking put into question the diversity of the practices. So I believe the roadmap project, what was its strength, it's really to look into this variety of contexts, to understand that there are different types of profiles and so on. So, but the comparison and trying to see who are the winners and the losers, the good students or the bad students, what wasn't really an objective. So when we did so, and I'm thinking of Massimo's work on policy, it was only really again to identify the diversity of issues and aspects and try to be able to address them in a tailored way, basically. And perhaps some answers to your question will come with the next presentation, when we will look into more, local and bottom-up kind of initiatives, where basically context, which are more context sensitive to everything. Yeah.
However, there are some constant elements in the countries that obtained the best results in terms of reduction of the use of antibiotics. Firstly, so increase awareness, so and also in the large public, especially in the large public, so that pressure from politicians, etc. And monitoring, so quantify the use and the potential risks, and also stricter measures, or to regulate the use some way. So so these are key. These has been key elements that we can find in all countries that obtained the best results in these terms.
Hi, Claire Carlisle, Animal Health Europe. In terms of triggers for change, did you find anything where negative media coverage impacted how farmers act and how veterinarians act in terms of prescribing?
You specify what you mean by negative media coverage?
All the reports in the media about misuse, overuse, using all the last line antibiotics, did that impact in any way?
Well, that hasn't been addressed as such, but I think that relates to also what Fanny was saying about the way the problem is framed, basically, and the difficulty for farmers, but also vets and other animal health professionals to properly perceive, in some cases, the importance of the issue, or whether it is related to public health issue, sustainability of the food production system challenge, or animal health issues, and so on. So, of course, if we look, some work that has been done, not necessarily in this project, but in other projects, like if you look 10 years back, of course, when we started to stress again the antimicrobial resistance problem, it is true that veterinarians and farmers were pointed as responsible of a bad use and so on. But I think we are not in this situation anymore, even if perhaps there are still some negative media coverage in some situations. But I do believe that the main issue here in terms of problem framing is what is AMR about? Is it a public health issue, an animal health issue, an environmental issue, sustainability of the food production chain issue, and so on? And there is still confusion on that, and I think we can improve basically the way the problem is framed in a way that it engages more actors, or more efficiently all the actors here. They must feel concerned basically by the problem, and I think here we have a room for improvement here.
Try to remember the order, people. But where's they go here?
Jonathan Rushton from the University of Liverpool, and I've been working with Zhao and the work he's presented. Zhao, you presented quite a bright outlook. I've got a slightly different view of how the work has gone. We aim to do a series of cost effectiveness analysis to move towards doing a marginal abatement cost curve approach to help policy in this area. What we found in the literature is it's very difficult to actually identify interventions and think about cost effectiveness analysis. So I think we're some way behind in this field where we're at with climate change intervention work. And I worry a little bit that the science we're doing at the moment is not capturing adequately the costs or the effectiveness of our interventions, and that's making it very difficult to make quite specific recommendations in the sector in general. But Zhao, do you want to just talk a little bit about the capture of the data that you did with the lit search, and which particular aspects of the livestock sector really were brought out from that work? Because it tends to be quite sector specific, doesn't it, rather than being across all species and all interventions.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So yes, the scoping literature revision started to identify 9,000 papers that could be reporting the effects of interventions or alternatives to antimicrobial usage in field production context. So in situations where animals were actually being produced and the conditions were not controlled at all. And in the end, after we gotten rid of the papers that were not going to contribute to the scoping literature revision, as I mentioned, ended up with 232 papers. The majority of these papers were actually looking into these aspects in dairy cattle. So I think like 60% of the whole papers. And there were very, very few from sectors such as the pig and poultry sector, which are known to be much more integrated. So one of the potential conclusions of this work could be that data is not being made available by these sectors because being so integrated, they own the whole value chain. They have the resources to do their own research, and this is not being made available. So we don't actually know what is working or what could inform other farmers to adopt the changes. And again, so this is made by private companies, and there's surely like some business secrecy within this sort of conclusion. Whereas the dairy sector not being so integrated or belonging into cooperatives, they are less resourceful looking into these aspects, so they're maybe more willing to collaborate with researchers to look into these aspects that can help them better manage the health of their animals. And again, so one thing that was striking is that this is very farm specific. So there's a lot of heterogeneity even within species for the same intervention or the same alternative. So all these farm specific factors need to be taken into consideration when advocating for any sort of change. So it's hard for us to say that, no, let's do this because this is going to work across the whole sector. So that there's no such conclusion that we could reach, and that's pretty much based on data limitation and data accessibility. I hope that's clear enough, Jonathan. But please let me know if it's not. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Nancy de Brienne, FEE. One of the recommendations is to have a more coordinated inter-actor, intersectorial collaboration. Now we have that already in some countries. I think like the UK has RUMA, you have in Belgium AMCRA. Did you see any effects of that? And then just to follow up on the last point, I completely agree. We did the same exercise on looking what was cost effective in respect to preventive intervention. And we found a lot on dairy cattle, but very little on pigs and poultry. And indeed to promote this preventive intervention, it would be really good to have more benefits and scientific evidence on the benefits they bring. Also economically, yeah.
To answer on the first part of your question, yes, I think that having an organization like AMCRA or HUMA really helps because it gives a direction towards change. So people decide together collectively, how are we going to implement change? And from there it starts. Now that's one level of coordination, but you can also have coordination between actors in your food supply chain. I think a nice example is the dairy sector in Denmark, where farmers became shareholders of an organic dairy company, and they completely coordinated themselves. They organized stable schools. Mette here could give you more information about it if you want later, but they exchanged experiences, etc. And so by organizing themselves in this way, antimicrobial use was also reduced. So you can have different levels of coordination between actors.
Yeah, I just have a question about the new business model for vets, because I just spoke about France, but like in poultry and pig, like for poultry and pig veterinarians, they already changed a lot because they were using a lot before. They've been targeted, and especially by the media, and so they managed to reduce a lot. And now, like, the problem is, like, before the advice was free, and now they have to find new income. So, of course, you have vaccines or other product alternative, and they diverse their income with diet or hygiene products. But the question is, do you have like other key trigger of success in other countries on the economic level? And on the dairy and beef sector, it's more like a problem solved at the moment, that they don't reach the advisor new model business.
No, but you raise an important point. I mean, what we saw that every country that we studied, I mean, this is a big challenge. Of course, all the countries are not at the same stage in terms of developing a business model that could be adapted basically to this new, not necessarily new, but to this type of preventive services, but and not just the countries, but also the sectors, because as you mentioned, we observed, of course, in more like the pig and poultry, where basically more intensive / industrial sectors, where the role of veterinarians are slightly different, especially preventive approaches or like herd approaches are much more developed. There is a longer history here of and the role of veterinarians is already slightly different to the dairy sector, for example. But all of them share the issue to monetize basically their services differently, because historically speaking, and this is true in every country, even if the history is a bit different, that basically the remuneration was based on interventions. And this is slightly changes, and it is related also to the development of new types of businesses, you know, corporate practices, network of practices, and so on, so that basically veterinarians become more and more able to monetize these different types of services. But of course, advice remains one of the key challenges, because because, of course, there are other competitors. Their clients are not used to pay for that. And I think it needs also not just, of course, economic or socio-economic innovation, but also some kind of a cultural shift in the way the role of the veterinarian is perceived. And things are moving forward, but differently according to the context. So we need to keep on working, I think, in this direction.
It's my turn now. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Arnaud Bouxin, working for FEFAC, so the feed industry. The debate is a lot on the relationship between the vets and the farmers. What I'm missing a bit in this first part, at least, of the day, is the role of the advisors, farm advisors, and in particular the feed advisors. And I went quickly through the booklet, and actually I could only find a couple of occurrences of feed and feed advisors, and especially in Netherlands, but not in other countries. So I'm wondering to which extent the role of these advisors has been integrated in the reflection, and in particular when it comes to the coordination. Is there any kind of conclusion driven from your work on the consistency of the messages which are delivered also to the farmers from different angles?
Well, we did the stakeholder mapping, so yes, in the Netherlands they were mentioned, but also in other case studies as well. Now, it also depends on the context. In an integrated context, feed advisors are de facto taken into the team. In a less integrated context, it could actually result in conflicts between feed advisors and veterinarians, because everyone gives advice. Feed advisors give it for free. Veterinarians must be paid for it, and so there you have like a little conflicts that can occur, and that's also in Belgium at least. People are trying to set up health teams, a bit like in the Netherlands, where you coordinate the advice that's being given by bringing everyone around the table. That's something that's been worked on. Caroline, you work on it. But it's not always easy, and it has been studied. Now here we didn't go into all the details, but in some case studies we indeed did study that.
Yes, just we have to cut, so I'm going to very, very quickly. So Ana Granados from FF. I was going to make the same question as Arnaud. In terms of feed, breeding, and so on, because you have explored the supply chain, how they put positive or negative pressure on farmers. When I say negative, is that they put a lot of pressure. But what about the farming level? But you have responded a lot, and we are having the stakeholders discussion later, so we can, I can give the floor to the next. Thank you, Nicolas.
Thank you, but I think it's an important point, actually, yes. Last two ones. Okay. Quick questions, quick answers.
Very quick. Finally, what about the experience of resistance to antibiotics? Because do these farmers and vets who are more motivated, do they experience resistance? Because at the end, we don't speak a lot of the problem itself. And is the experience of this facing resistance in the use of antibiotic, is it a driver for change? Or finally, is it very secondary? We have the problem of reducing the use, and we don't think a lot of the problem of resistance itself. You understand what I mean?
Well, I should answer under the control of veterinarians here, but from what I've heard from the field is that, no, I don't think many farmers and veterinarians have experienced issues of resistance on their farms, actually. And this is also why, and this relates to another question earlier, that is it animal health or a public health problem, and how to frame that to motivate people to be engaged in AMU reduction, because it's true that it's not a daily issue that is experienced as such, probably by these people. So it's even more, I mean, it's not more difficult, but it brings a specific difficulty to be able to see the problem as a global problem, and not necessarily like a local or context-based problem.
Okay, I just have a brief comment to the question on the business model for vets. I'm Hanne Kongsted from Aarhus University. In Denmark, since the 90s, it hasn't been allowed for vets to earn money on antibiotics, and farmers are obliged to have an agreement with the vet who visits every month. So in our case, we are helped very much by regulations. So the farmer has to pay for advice.
Well, thank you very much. What? Okay, very quickly. The last of the last.
Sorry to delay things. Orla Shortall from the James Hutton Institute, just to build on what Nicola was saying, that farmers did report potentially experiencing resistance, but it was something that was quite difficult to prove, that they might not get it tested that it was resistance, and it was difficult to differentiate why the antibiotic didn't work necessarily. Was it resistance? Was it other factors? Was it actually a viral infection? So generally, the way farmers talked about it, it seemed like antibiotic resistance was something out there in society and for other people and potentially in the future. So that comes back to what we were saying about framing. Is there a possibility to frame it as a problem for farmers and animals in the present as well? And how does that change how you go about addressing it?
Thank you very much, Orla. All right, thanks a lot for this nice first discussion. We will leave the stage for the next presenters, so please.